Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis,
Yeah.
there is this expectation of absolute precision.
Right. Yeah, like a broken arm or something.
Exactly. You
Yeah.
go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and you see that jagged white line on the black background. And the doctor just points to it and says, there it is. That's the problem.
Yeah, and it's comforting,
Yeah.
Because it's visible. You can see exactly what needs fixing.
Right. But when you step into the world of community development, into neighborhood ecosystems and congregational life, that x-ray machine is, well, it's fundamentally broken.
Completely broken.
Because an x-ray only shows you the fractures. It only shows you what is missing or damaged. It never shows you the immune system, It never shows you the healing capacity that is already pulsing through the body.
Which is exactly why we get trapped in what we call these diagnostic muddy waters. I mean, if you only scan a community for its deficits, you're only ever going to treat it like a patient.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
You'll never treat it like a partner. And honestly, that approach has completely dominated the landscape for decades.
And that really brings us to the core tension we are unpacking today. Welcome to this deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited for this one.
Today, we are exploring a massive, paradigm-shifting, 9-step congregational formation framework called the Rooted Path. But before we get into the mechanics or the digital infrastructure of all this, we really have to establish who this is actually for.
Right. The primary practitioners.
Exactly. First and foremost, we have to acknowledge this framework was built for pastors. Pastors are the primary practitioners here. They're the ones in the trenches every single day.
Yeah, they really are.
Every single congregation that enters a Rooted Path does so because a pastor made a courageous and, frankly, often exhausting decision to stop simply managing their congregation and start truly forming them.
And that pastoral courage is the foundation of literally everything we're going to discuss today. But I actually want to make a deliberate pivot right out of the gate here.
Okay, let's pivot.
Because while the framework is undoubtedly built for pastors, for the rest of this conversation, I am speaking directly to you, the listener, specifically to the funders, the foundations, the denominational leaders, and the network directors.
Okay, so let's unpack this. If I'm a grant maker, right?
Yep.
I'm sitting at a foundation desk holding the purse strings, or maybe I'm a denominational leader with structural power. Why is this specific deep dive critical for me?
Well, because you are the ones tasked with scaling impact. You're the ones reading these endless proposals, trying to determine what will actually take root and what's just going to, evaporate the second the grant cycle ends.
Right, when the money runs out.
Exactly. So if you hold that structural power, this deep dive is your manual for understanding what true capacity building actually looks like, because we are talking about moving an entire community from a mindset of scarcity to an operating system of abundance.
Let's start with the historical landscape then,
Yeah.
because I want to be really clear up front.
Yeah.
The field of Christian community development has a long, incredibly rich history. It isn't a wasteland.
Not at all. Not even close. And I think we have to approach the broader field with immense grace and generosity here.
Surely.
The faith-based community development field didn't stall out because of lack of effort or lack of theology or lack of love. I mean, funders and foundations have invested billions of dollars with incredibly good intentions and genuine care.
So it's not a failure of commitment.
No, absolutely not. If you look at the historical layers of this field, it is actually a beautiful, decades-long progression.
I want to break down those layers because I think understanding what funders have already paid for, what's already been built, really explains why we are stuck today. Walk me through how this field was actually constructed over the years.
Sure. Think of it as a house being built over the last, say, 50 years. The first layer was philosophy and theology.
Okay.
Thinkers like John M. Perkins gave the field the theology of presence and relocation.
Right. The idea that you don't just commute into a neighborhood to save it, you actually move into it to live with it.
Exactly. That was totally groundbreaking. Then, moving into the early 2000s, we got the methodology layer. People like Luther Snow introduced the philosophy of asset mapping. John McKnight and John Kretzmann built these global frameworks for asset-based community development.
Ah, yes. This is the era of the sticky notes.
Yes. famous sticky notes.
I mean, this is when every church basement in America had a whiteboard absolutely covered in Post-it notes listing things like, "We have a commercial kitchen," and "Mrs. Davis knows how to sew."
Yeah, and we shouldn't laugh because it was a vital, totally necessary awakening. It gave congregations a framework for seeing abundance instead of just staring at their deficits.
Right, right.
But then, after that, came the theological and poverty formation layer. Organizations like the Chalmers Center did this incredible work explaining the deep psychological connections between poverty, dignity, and dependency.
That's the idea that simply handing out resources can actually strip a community of its agency.
Right. Spot on. They taught the field that you can actually hurt people if you don't form them first. Then came the institutional asset stewardship layer. Groups like Partners for Sacred Places stepping in to help churches realize that their huge, empty physical buildings are massive community assets, not just financial liabilities pulling them under.
Which is a huge shift in perspective.
Huge. And finally, the fifth layer, which is what we're seeing now. Massive leadership ecosystem investments. We are talking about initiatives like the Thriving Congregations Initiative, where foundations are pouring just unprecedented resources into pastoral pipelines and leadership training.
Okay, I am looking at that historical stack, and I mean, it is impressive. Brilliant minds, incredible theology, millions of grant dollars deployed with genuine care. So I have to ask the flashing red light question here.
Lay it on me.
If the field has had all these brilliant minds and we have all this incredible theology, and walls literally covered in asset mapping sticky notes, why does the momentum fade 6 months later? Why does the church janitor sweep up those fallen sticky notes on Monday morning, and by Wednesday, the church is just running the exact same tired food pantry program they were running 10 years ago?
It's the million-dollar question, and the answer is that what the broader field has missed is not a failure of vision, it is a gap in infrastructure.
A gap in infrastructure.
Yes.
Yeah.
The field built the door. It built the theology, the learning journeys, the beautiful field guides. But theology without a transferable methodology leaves leaders with a deep conviction and absolutely no map.
Oh, that makes so much sense.
Right. A beautiful story about a church doing asset mapping that cannot be replicated at scale. Only a system can be replicated. Funders have invested in the seeds, but the field lacked an integrated, replicable operating system to prepare the soil before those seeds are ever planted.
And that is a crucial distinction. We want to be really clear. The rooted path does not critique what came before it. It honors it entirely.
Absolutely.
It simply builds the house that goes with the door Luther Snow opened. It builds what was missing. It replaces that temporary sticky note excitement with a replicable operating system. But before we get into the software or the actual chronological sequence of the 9 steps, the source material insists we have to start with the soil. The prerequisite to this entire framework is addressing history and posture.
You absolutely have to, because most community development programs, even the really well-funded ones, try to treat problems by assessing what is missing. That is that deficit lens we talked about. But you cannot ask a community to suddenly inventory its abundance if its entire inherited narrative, its historical identity, is built on scarcity and erasure.
Right. And I saw a reference in the notes to a man named Turner Fair III in Indianapolis back in 1996. How does a printing company owner connect to fixing a congregation's scarcity mindset?
It is honestly one of the most profound examples of pre-formation work. So Turner Fair III ran AfroChart products, and he used to meet people in the basement of his home to teach anyone who was willing to listen about who Black people were before the world told them who they were not supposed to be.
Wow.
He would hand out this large format poster he printed titled World History, an African Perspective. It was a series of concentric circles placing Africa right at the center of human civilization.
So if I'm a foundation director looking at a grant for a local community development project, how does a historical map from a basement in 1996 change the tangible outcome of a neighborhood project today?
Because it changes the entire internal posture of the people executing the project. Think about it. For Black congregations specifically, if the story of your people starts in 1619, your institutional memory begins in captivity. It starts in trauma, deficit, and scarcity. So when a funder asks you what you bring to the table, you subconsciously operate from a deficit framework. You're thinking about what you lack. But if your timeline starts 5,000 years earlier with the Kingdom of Kush, the Mali Empire, the Aksumite Empire, Suddenly, that congregation is operating from a civilizational legacy of profound abundance.
It is a complete identity reorientation.
Yeah.
You are fundamentally changing the starting line.
Exactly. And this manifests practically in the framework through what is called the Beyond 400 Pre-Formation series. It's a journey that re-anchors the congregation in that ancient legacy before they ever make a single operational decision.
Huh.
Because the core tenet of this entire framework is this: identity precedes inventory.
Identity precedes inventory.
Right. You cannot inventory your gifts if you do not know who you are.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. The soil is tilled, the identity is reoriented. Let's move into the actual chronological sequence of the 9 steps.
Let's do it.
Step 1 is recognize. But the sources describe this as an internal spiritual shift, not a data gathering exercise.
That's exactly right. Recognition is not about opening a spreadsheet. It is about recovering the truth that what you already carry actually matters. The founder of this framework experienced this vividly.
Zanzibar story, right?
Yes. In July 2025, he found himself standing barefoot on the shores of the Indian Ocean in Zanzibar, Tanzania. He was walking the shoreline, just trying to find stillness after a season of intense professional burnout and constant motion, and the ocean washed up this piece of driftwood.
Just a random piece of wood.
Just driftwood, but it was smoothed out, shaped perfectly like a staff. He picked it up, and in that absolute stillness, he had this profound moment of clarity. The realization was simply, what is in your hand is enough.
Man, that immediately makes me think of the biblical story of Moses. When Moses was standing before the burning bush, he was basically giving God a list of his deficits. He said he wasn't eloquent, he wasn't a powerful leader, he didn't have the right resources. But God didn't hand Moses a new tool. He didn't give him a bigger budget or a strategic plan. God simply asked, what is that in your hand?
And what was in his hand? Just an ordinary shepherd's staff, a piece of wood. But when it was recognized and offered, it became an instrument of liberation. That is the essence of step 1.
Recognizing the quiet assets.
Yes, the seemingly ordinary assets already present in your congregation. It is the woman who has attended every Sunday for 40 years and knows exactly what to say to the grieving mother because she has lived it. It's the local electrician who has rewired half the houses on the street and knows exactly which families are quietly behind on their heating bills. Those aren't just nice congregants, those are structural community assets.
Right. But to actually mobilize them, you have to move to step 2, which is observe.
Yeah.
And this is where the language in the text gets a little lofty. It calls observation a discipline of becoming.
I know, it sounds a bit abstract.
Yeah, I mean, discipline of becoming sounds like something from a silent retreat brochure. If I am looking at the practical reality of a church on a Tuesday night, what does it actually look like? Are we just sending church folks out into the neighborhood with demographic clipboards?
No, absolutely no clipboards allowed. Observation in this framework forms posture before it ever produces insight. Walking with a clipboard means you have an agenda. You are looking for a problem to solve. The discipline of becoming means the practice of walking your neighborhood without an agenda, without your phone, and without trying to fix anything.
So just walking to see what's there.
It is slowing down your nervous system enough to see what is actually there, not what your strategic plan expected to find. It is very much like Jesus walking through the noisy, chaotic crowd in Jericho. Everyone was focused on the spectacle, but Jesus was the only one observant enough to look up and actually notice Zacchaeus hiding in the sycamore tree.
There is a story from Cornerstone Missionary Baptist that perfectly illustrates what happens when you drop the clipboard. Walk us through what their leadership team did.
Yeah. The pastors at Cornerstone took this observe phase incredibly seriously. They told their deacons to go walk the neighborhood. Just look. One deacon, who had grown up 10 blocks away and had been a member for 30 years, walked 2 streets over. And for the very first time, he actually saw a group of older men and women sitting on folding chairs outside a corner store. They were there every single evening.
Okay, so if I am a grant maker, I am looking at that and thinking, okay, how do I put sitting on a folding chair into an impact report? What is the actual value there?
The value is profound, invisible infrastructure. Those elders weren't waiting for a handout. They weren't in distress. They were simply present. They watched the street. They spoke to the kids walking by after school. And by their collective, consistent presence, they were providing a massive layer of neighborhood safety and cohesion.
Wow.
They were the neighborhood watch, the counselors, and the peacekeepers, all operating without a single dollar of funding.
And the church's response is what makes this framework different. They didn't go back and launch a Cornerstone safety program to replace the elders.
Exactly. They didn't try to institutionalize it. They partnered with what was already working. They started bringing the elders cold water in the summer and hot drinks in the winter, and when the church finally recognized them, one of the older women said something that should just shatter our traditional view of community development. She said, "We didn't know anyone
We
noticed."
didn't know anyone noticed.
If the people faithfully holding your neighborhood together don't know the church notices them, the church doesn't have an action problem. It has an observation problem.
Oof, that is powerful. So the deacon observed the elders, but observation without a system just leads to warm feelings. How does a church actually capture that data without dehumanizing the elders or turning congregants into mere data points? And I guess that brings us to step 3, organize.
Yes, this is the sacred inventory phase.
This is where the sticky notes are officially retired and structured formation takes over using a digital engine called GiftScape.
This is the critical transition where private insight becomes collective, actionable understanding. GiftScape maps out 5 specific discovery categories. And the sequence of these categories is deeply intentional. It moves from the tangible to the deeply spiritual.
Let's walk through the mechanics of that. I want to hit these in exact order. What is the first category?
Number 1 is skills and abilities. These are the professional, practical, and technical capabilities people have developed over their working lives.
Like certifications and trades.
Yes. Think of the retired firefighter at a church called Grace on the Hill. He had sat in the 4th pew on the left for 11 years. He had active safety and emergency response certifications. He offered his help once, a decade ago, got a polite thank you, and was never asked again.
Oh, man.
He sat there for 11 years with life-saving skills nobody bothered to organize.
That brings us to number 2, relational assets.
Yes. These are the networks, the social capital, the institutional access that members carry into every room they enter. It is the young professional whose corporate workplace spans multiple sectors, or the elder whose decades of wisdom have earned them a hearing in local civic rooms. It maps who knows who.
Okay, the number 3 is physical assets. This is the obvious stuff, right? The church van, the commercial kitchen that sits empty 5 days a week, the empty parsonage gathering dust.
Exactly, the tangibles.
But then we hit the 4th category, and I have to push back here.
Yeah.
The 4th category is aspirations. Now, if I am a foundation director looking at a capacity building grant, aspirations sounds like an unfundable daydream. How is a church supposed to quantify wishful thinking?
I'm so glad you pushed back on that, because that is a very common misconception in the philanthropic world, but it requires a firm correction. Aspirations in the context of formation are not wishes. They are not daydreams. They are directional indicators of where God is already pulling a person. They are the undeveloped callings that people carry but have never had a context or, frankly, the permission to express.
Give me a tangible example of an aspiration becoming an actual asset.
Let's look at a teenage girl at that same rural church, Grace on the Hill. She had been taking photographs around her town on her phone since she was 12. During the GiftScape inventory, she isn't asked what committee she wants to join. She is asked what she aspires to do.
Oh, I love that.
She talks about the elders in the church. She realizes that the entire history of their changing town lives in the memories of those elders, and nobody is capturing it. Because the church gave meaningful emphasis to her aspirations, they didn't just recruit a youth group volunteer. They unlocked a documentary historian who went on to capture the oral history of an entire generation.
That is incredible. Okay, the 5th and final category requires some serious depth here. Spiritual gifts. And I want to be careful here because in modern church culture, we love our personality tests. Is this just mapping out who is an Enneagram 3 or an introverted Myers-Briggs type?
Absolutely not. Spiritual gifts are not personality traits. They are not psychological preferences. In this framework, spiritual gifts are formation anchors.
Formation anchors.
Yes. We are talking about the biblical empowerments given by the Holy Spirit for the building up of the body, prophecy, healing, encouragement, discernment, administration. When a congregation stops looking at itself as a random collection of individuals and actually names its spiritual gaze collectively, it begins to see the exact shape of what it was assembled by God to carry in its specific time and place. It realizes it isn't an accident.
So to summarize step 3, we have mapped the internal capacity. We have organized the skills, relationships, buildings, aspirations, and spiritual gifts. But a map on a server doesn't feed a neighborhood. How does this data actually transform a community? That moves us into step 4, transform, and step 5, engage.
And the mechanism of transformation in the rooted path is fascinating because it completely inverts typical church leadership.
How so?
Transformation here is not a tops-down mandate. The pastor doesn't stand at the pulpit on Sunday and unveil a massive new strategic plan that requires a $1 million capital campaign. Transformation is simply the natural, organic fruit of formed people releasing what is already in their hands.
There's a story about New Light Fellowship that perfectly captures this lack of a top-down mandate. The founder of the framework was sitting in the back of their fellowship hall on a Thursday evening after Bible study. He overhears 3 people talking in the corner, 2 retired teachers and a local entrepreneur. Between the 3 of them, they have over 60 years of professional formation and hiring experience.
Right.
And they're talking about specific people in their neighborhood, a young man who failed 3 job interviews because he didn't know how to code switch, and a single mother trying to re-enter the workforce.
In a traditional model, they would go to the pastor, ask to form a committee, spend 6 months debating a budget line item, and apply for a grant. What did they do instead?
They literally just started a job readiness workshop on a Saturday morning. No budget, no committee. They just used their organized skills.
We see the exact same principle in the story of Clara's garden. Clara was an older woman who just inherently knew how to garden. She carried the knowledge of soil, seasons, and seed saving in her hands. She noticed that families in her immediate neighborhood were in a food desert, cut off from fresh produce.
And because the church had done the formation work, she just had permission to act.
Exactly. She, a construction worker who knew how to build raised beds, and an elder who understood irrigation, just started working. They turned an unused patch of grass at the edge of the church property into a community garden.
And the ROI on that garden wasn't just tomatoes. Neighbors who hadn't spoken to each other in 3 years were suddenly pulling weeds next to each other. They accidentally reconciled a fractured block, which leads directly into step 5, engage. This is the shift from saving a neighborhood to genuinely neighboring a neighborhood.
And there is a specific biblical posture that governs this engagement. It is the Luke 10 principle.
Refresh my memory on that.
When Jesus sent out the 72 disciples into the surrounding towns, he gave them very specific instructions. He told them to carry no purse, no bag, no extra sandals. He told them to eat whatever was set before them. He sent them as guests, not as experts.
Wow. When a church arrives as an expert with a pre-packaged program, they create dependency. When they arrive as a guest, they build trust.
Exactly. You engage your community as a neighbor. You build trust slowly. You don't burst in trying to fix everything.
Okay, but let me play devil's advocate here for a second. The garden is growing. The job workshops are packed. The congregation is deeply engaged in the neighborhood. They are riding a wave of organic momentum. But as any funder knows, unmanaged momentum creates burnout.
Oh, absolutely.
How do they keep from exhausting the staff? Because the fastest way to kill a church is to say yes to every good idea until the core volunteers just collapse.
That is precisely why the framework does not end at engagement. You do not just keep expanding infinitely. You move to step 6, discern, and step 7, reflect. And this introduces one of the most vital concepts in the entire framework, holy subtraction.
Holy subtraction, that is a brilliant term. Break down the framing of that for me.
At this stage in the sequence, the work is no longer about addition. A congregation that has named its gifts, organized its assets, and engaged its community must now purposefully discern what it will not do. Most congregational initiatives fail not because they lacked resources, but because they said yes to absolutely everything and formed nothing.
They chased every neighborhood need instead of staying disciplined within the lane of the gifts they actually hold.
Precisely.
There is a profound parallel here to the story of Elijah in the cave. Elijah had just come off this massive, highly visible, dramatic season of ministry. He called down fire from heaven. He ended a multi-year drought. I mean, it was peak community engagement.
He was busy.
Very busy. But the next time we see him, he is exhausted, terrified, and hiding in a cave. God passes by, and there's a great wind that shatters rocks, an earthquake, and a fire. But the text says God wasn't in the noise, the shaking, or the fire. After all of that, there is a still, small voice, a whisper.
And discernment is the discipline of leaning in to hear that whisper. It is the congregation wading through the chaotic noise of successful engagement to hear what God is actually calling them to sustain, and more importantly, what they need to lay down.
That is holy subtraction.
Exactly, and that flows directly into step 7, reflect.
Now, the sources use an analogy here for reflection, featuring Eileen Gu, the Olympic gold medalist skier. She was doing a press conference, and a reporter asked her about her training. Instead of talking about gym routines, she starts talking about neuroplasticity.
Right, the brain science.
She talks about how the brain actually rewires itself through visualization and reflection. I want to challenge that metaphor, though. When you say a congregation rewires its neuroplasticity during reflection, what does that practically mean? Are we talking about changing actual budget lines or just changing who gets the microphone on Sunday morning?
It means changing the invisible architecture of the church. Think about it. The medals Eileen Gu won are the visible fruit. In a church, the visible fruit is attendance numbers, grat dollars won, and square footage built.
The stuff you can put on a spreadsheet.
Right. But the neuroplasticity, the internal rewiring that is the invisible fruit, reflection tracks the invisible fruit. It tracks the trust that was painstakingly rebuilt between the church and the local school board. It tracks the quiet, racial wounds that were acknowledged and healed. If a foundation only forces a church to evaluate visible metrics, they completely miss the actual formation.
But that brings us to a terrifying operational cliff. Let's say a congregation has done all this beautiful, deep work. They've recognized, observed, organized, transformed, engaged, discerned, and reflected. Their invisible fruit is flourishing. But what happens when the bivocational pastor gets relocated to another city? Or the head deacon, who holds all the community relationships in his head, retires? Does organizational amnesia set in? Do they lose the entire operating system?
Historically, in the field of community development, the answer is yes.
Ouch.
The memory of the church walked out the door with the specific individuals who held it. And that catastrophic loss of momentum is exactly why we arrive at Step 8, ClearPath Intelligence and its 6 engines.
Okay, before we explain the technology, we must enforce the framing rule. The formation framework always leads. The technology serves that sequence. It never, ever replaces the human formation.
Absolutely. ClearPath Intelligence is the digital companion. It is the operating system that makes everything the framework produces permanent, searchable, and transferable. It entirely prevents organizational amnesia, and it operates through 6 specific digital engines.
Let's name all 6 of these engines because this is the integrated infrastructure the philanthropic field has been waiting decades for.
All right. First is GiftScape. This is the internal discovery engine we just discussed, permanently mapping the skills, assets, and spiritual gifts of the members.
Okay, second is ContextScape. This is the external community intelligence engine.
Third is ResourceScape. This is the wraparound service provider network mapping.
Fourth is Ministry Match, the people-to-purpose matching engine.
Fifth is Opportunity Match, the community-to-congregation matching engine.
And finally, number 6 is CommunityScape, the overarching ecosystem integration that pulls all of this data into a shared regional intelligence layer. But, naming them isn't enough. Walk me through the actual mechanics. How do these engines work together in a real-world scenario?
Let's look at the correct textbook example of ClearPath Intelligence in action. Imagine a congregation has observed that young families in their immediate neighborhood are radically underserved regarding childcare. In the old sticky note model, the church would just guess.
Right, they'd form a committee, try to start a daycare, guess at the curriculum, apply for a random grant, and just hope for the best.
But using the engines, the process is entirely different, completely different. First, the leadership opens the platform and looks at GiftScape. Because they have done the rigorous formation work of Step 3, the platform already knows that sitting in their pews are 3 specific members with professional backgrounds in early childhood education and 1 who aspires to transition into administration.
They don't have to put out a bulletin announcement and beg for volunteers. They already know exactly who holds the capacity.
Next, they pull up ContextScape. And to answer your earlier question about mechanics, this engine pulls from live municipal data, census tracts, and school board reports. It maps the exact 1-mile radius around the physical church building.
Oh, wow, so it's hyperlocal.
Very local. It surfaces exactly which secular community organizations are already working with toddlers, and it highlights precisely where the geographic or service gaps are. It prevents the church from duplicating a service that the community center 3 blocks away is already doing well.
Then they overlay ResourceScape. This engine identifies the specific foundations, the public health benefits, and the funding opportunities that are perfectly aligned to support early childhood education in that exact zip code.
Look at what just happened here. The congregation does not blindly build a new program based on a good intention. Through the integration of these engines, they deploy formed people into confirmed gaps with known resources.
Deploy formed people into confirmed gaps with known resources. It's a masterclass in stewardship. It honors the community by not duplicating services. It honors the funder by utilizing targeted, data-backed resources. And it honors the congregation by utilizing their actual recognized gifts.
That level of intelligence prepares a congregation not for an ending, but for a sustainable beginning. Which brings us to the final step of the framework. Step 9. Bless next steps.
What actually happens in Step 9? Is this just a graduation ceremony where the consultant packs up their laptop and the church claps?
It is the exact opposite. Step 9 is a vital psychological and structural shift. It is a commissioning. It looks backward in deep gratitude at the formation journey the church has just survived, and it looks forward in faith. It is the specific moment where power is completely transferred. The church commissions its own internal facilitators to lead the next cycle, ensuring the congregation never develops consultant dependency. They own their own operating system.
We have walked the entire path. From the soil of identity, through the internal organization, into community engagement, digital infrastructure, and commissioning. But I have to ask the origin story here. Who actually built this? Who looked at a messy, Post-it note covered church basement and saw the matrix of a scalable operating system behind it?
The man behind the framework is A. Damien Kurd, and his professional background is exactly what makes this entire system so robust. He didn't start his career in a seminary or a church basement.
Oh, really?
No, he spent decades operating at the executive level, building complex operational infrastructure inside some of America's most regulated and intricate organizations, utilities, financial services, and municipal institutions.
And what he noticed across every single one of those disparate corporate sectors was the exact same pattern.
Yeah.
The gap between what an organization held and what it could actually deploy was never a resource problem.
Yeah.
It was always a formation problem. It was a failure to align people, process, and technology in the correct sequence.
So when he eventually transitioned into faith community work, the collision of those two worlds was inevitable. He spent his nights working with bivocational pastors at 2 a.m., desperately trying to finish grant proposals because those pastors had absolutely zero margin in their lives.
Yeah.
And he saw the identical gap operating at a congregational scale. These churches had incredible hearts, they had profound theology, they had immense physical footprints, but there was zero infrastructure designed to help them see what they carried and deploy it sustainably.
They had the calling, but they had no container to hold it.
Exactly. The Rooted Path and ClearPath Intelligence are what he built when he finally stopped waiting for someone else to see the solution. He operationalized the theology of presence so that pastors and communities wouldn't have to carry the logistical weight of transformation alone.
And that brings us full circle back to you, the listener, the funder, the foundation director, the network leader holding the structural power. I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over as you look at your next stack of grant proposals. If the infrastructure now exists to map human capacity at scale, without exploiting it, if you can clearly see the relational assets, the organized skills, the spiritual gifts, and the internal neuroplasticity of a community, what happens to your entire grant-making strategy when you can finally see the invisible fruit of a community before you ever write the check?
That visibility changes the entire ecosystem of philanthropy. It shifts funding from a gamble to an investment in known capacity. Because as the text mandates we remember, the question is no longer whether this can be built, the question is whether it can be held.
We want to warmly thank you for joining us at the table and spending your valuable time with us today. We express our genuine hope that you took something deeply meaningful away from this conversation about formation, capacity, and the true nature of abundance.
Stay rooted, my friends.
Stay rooted, my friends.